It's AM 650's The Law Show, a comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Well, good morning and welcome to The Law Show here on AM 650. On this episode of the program, we are joined by our friends from Murphy Battista, LLP. Lawyers Scott Stanley and Kevin Gorley are back with us in the studio. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Sterling.
Good morning.
Kevin, good to see you again. It's been a while. We see Scott a little more frequently than you. You two have, before we get into a description of Murphy Battista and all the rest of it, I want to just cut to the headline here, because you two have worked together very recently on a case that was just resolved here in British Columbia just before Christmas, so it's brand new in the legal terms. It's very fresh. A personal injury award that is one of the highest ever in our province. Tell us about it, Scott.
Yeah, Kevin and I represented this really nice doctor who was rear-ended in an accident, and it wasn't a particularly big rear-ender, but it was enough for him to sustain a concussion.
Was he here in Vancouver?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
in BC.
Okay.
And as a result of that concussion, he could just never return to work, and he made valiant effort after effort to try to return to work, and it just never worked out for him. And he was 46 at the time, and you can imagine a doctor unable to work again, that's going to produce some fairly big income loss for this
Well,
fellow.
if you don't mind my stopping you for half a second, I can also imagine the counsel for the opposing team going, seriously, a concussion from a rear-ender and you're incapable of working again ever? Oh, come on. How do you prove that?
Well, that's pretty much what their defense was.
I
And
bet.
You prove it by having a very credible, honest, hardworking client. And this is a fellow who worked 30% more than any other doctor in his group, absolutely loved his job, lived and loved to be a doctor, and was legitimately unable to do it again. And his inability to practice medicine just destroyed him as a person.
I can well imagine.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, how did you go about establishing, beyond his track record, as Scott's pointed out, hard-working guy, terribly dedicated, how did you go about proving that what would seem to us to be a simple concussion as a result of a rear-ender would render a vital human being incapable of professional endeavors?
Well, the truth is, in a claim like that, statistically, that accident could happen 1,000 times, and maybe only once will it result in a concussion that's going to have long-lasting effects.
Right.
But we don't end up in court 7 years later on the 999 cases where it didn't result in those injuries.
Right.
The way you prove them is a combination of witnesses, lay witnesses, people, doctors, family members, colleagues, that worked with the plaintiff over the years and are able to come in, and were able to come in and speak to the night and day difference for this gentleman from the day before the accident to the day after, and how he'd never been able to return to the way he had been before the accident, both on a personal and a professional level. And then that's supported by the variety of medical experts who come in and give their opinion evidence about what exactly has happened in this case and why it's resulted in these long-term effects, which you wouldn't normally expect to see, but do happen from time to time.
Sure. So if your side brought in medical experts, Scott, to prove the situation was indeed valid in this case, did the other side offer up medical experts going, oh, come on?
They tried.
Okay.
They tried, but the reality of it is that these doctors have to answer the questions honestly, and they did that. And when they were in the witness box, we would just ask them, look, if the person has all these problems and there's no other explanation for these problems, and if we accept these problems are true,
right,
the most likely explanation is that this fellow sustained a concussion. Even though it's unlikely to have occurred, it probably occurred for him. And the defense doctors had to answer yes to that question.
Right. When you set it in that sort of context, how else could you answer?
Right. I actually think the best piece of evidence we had was the defense surveillance video. I thought it was absolutely brilliant evidence for us. What happens if...
Would you get a closed-circuit camera shot of the accident taking place or something then?
No, from time to time, if the defense is suspicious about a certain person, they'll send a private investigator to...
Oh, sure. We hear about this ICBC doing this from time to time as well.
Well, and that's who I think was involved with this.
Okay. So they sent a private eye after the guy to check out whether he was faking or not.
Well, they did it, and I thought the video, when they sent the video to us, I thought, what a gift.
Right.
This video, it illustrates exactly what we're trying to show. And our client maintained that because he was so befuddled, he couldn't look after his children. And there were instances where he would, he would not pay attention to them and they'd get hurt. And so he maintained, look, I don't leave the house without the nanny.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, they have surveillance video of him out with his children, and, of course, the nanny's with him. The nanny's carrying the backpack because he can't remember it. When the nanny does give him the backpack, he stuffs his wallet in it and then leaves it behind, forgets it.
Right, right.
And I think the most telling piece of evidence, which the judge actually comments on in the reasoning, is he doesn't seem to notice when his 2-year-old makes a beeline for the parking lot. He just wasn't paying attention.
Right.
And so it basically illustrated exactly what we said this fellow's problems were.
Right, and the inability to pay attention to even the basic sort of parenting a 2-year-old duties, he wasn't capable of that. And the defense provided the evidence. How odd is that?
It was a gift.
No kidding, no kidding. Now, here's another thing about Murphy Battista, friends, that you need to know. In this case that we're discussing right now with Kevin and Scott, this is not some kind of overnight thing. How many years did you work for this doctor before you finally got a judgment in his favor, Scott?
We worked the case was ongoing for 7 years. He had another lawyer initially for the first 2 years and then hired us, switched lawyers. But from the time of the accident to the time of the judgment, it was 7 years.
Right.
So long, long time.
Right. And what was the award, Kevin?
It was just under $6 million.
Okay. And most of that would have been based on this, it was mid-40s, right? 47?
46 at the time of the accident.
So I assume the courts have a sort of a formula that they apply. If it's proven that the individual is no longer capable of making money, then the award will factor into the money he should have been able to make. Is that the bulk of the award?
Yeah, the vast majority of the award in a case like that would be to compensate him for the money that he would have been able to earn had the accident not happened.
Right. And are there any other inclusions in that final number, Scott, beyond the mathematical money he should have been able to make?
Well, he was awarded a sum of money for his pain and suffering,
Okay.
his past wage loss, his future wage loss, the medical expenses that he paid out to date, and then some future medical expenses, which were fairly minor.
Right. Now, all of this, again, you just have to understand that these are dedicated people who took on the case 5 years ago, because the case, in fact, was a 7-year lifespan, but you were with them for 5 years. How much money did you get paid over that 5-year span before the award, Scott?
Well, we haven't been paid anything yet.
Wow.
Case is under appeal.
Oh, is that right? Well, is that normal, given the size of the award? It's almost an automatic that, we can't let that go by.
Well, this is, if you look at the top 5 largest cases ever in BC history, our firm, I think, has the top, 3 of the top 5, and they might even be 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
These cases never go down easy.
Right.
When you're dealing with cases of this magnitude. So there almost is always going to be an appeal, and that'll probably stretch out another year. And that's just common. It's just expected with these types of cases.
And so, but how do law firms like Murphy Battista make a buck if you invest 5 years or now maybe even 6 without making a dime, despite the fact that it's looking pretty good that somewhere along the way you're going to get paid? But, I mean, what does the firm do, Kevin, when they decide to take on a case like this, knowing that it's quite likely to go on for quite a long time without any dollars coming across the threshold of the law firm?
Well, the firm is I think fairly blessed to have a financial backbone that allows its lawyers to take on cases like this that are going to last many, many years. Of course, the firm has a large number of files, and we're not waiting on one.
Of course.
Over the course of 7 years.
Right.
But the firm has the means to essentially wait that out, and that allows us to not have to, for example, pressure clients to try to take an early or improvident settlement.
Right.
Because we want to get paid. That doesn't happen.
Okay. Murphy Battista, we've had the Joes, Joe Murphy and Joe Battista, the two principals in studio in the past. And remind us a little bit about the firm, Scott. You are one of the senior partners in the firm, and you've been with them for how many years now?
8 years.
Okay.
8 years.
And before you joined the firm, and Kevin too, you both worked for insurance companies, so you know the playbook in many cases when you go to court against these people.
I think we do. It's nothing, liar, liar, pants on fire.
Right,
it's
right,
not a
right.
complicated playbook.
But you get a sense of the mindset behind their strategies, right?
I think so. Yeah, so the two Joes, Joe Murphy, Joe Battista, started the firm in 1981,
Right.
and they were two young bucks at the time. They'd like to think they're still young bucks. That's debatable.
And was it a personal injury law firm right from the get-go?
It was.
That's the only law the firm practices.
Yeah, these fellas were really the pioneers that decided to embark and make a firm that dealt with just these cases, and they dealt with high-profile, big cases. The leading cases in BC, some of the leading cases in Canada were handled by this firm. And they really sort of set the standard, I think, in terms of how other firms have and how other firms are practicing. And they did it very simply. They focused on the client's interest. They've never advertised. They've just simply, the philosophy of the firm is just identify what your client needs and wants and serve them as best you can.
Advertise. Now, there's another thing that I was going to ask you both about, Kevin. So, and thank you for opening that door, Scott. We're starting to see, as we are here on the Law Show with you two from Murphy Battista, but even on television, in the newspapers, etc., we're seeing more and more advertising, Kevin, by law firms, and we never used to see any. So what's going on there? What sort of changes have occurred that allow law firms to advertise where they were once upon a time ago forbidden? Who does the forbidding and who does the allowing?
Well, it's the Law Society who sets the guidelines for what is and is not permissible. And I think that those guidelines have been relaxed in recent years, but there's not a bright line rule that X is allowed and Y isn't.
Okay.
We are seeing a lot more advertising, especially late night TV. The back of the phone book stuff, I think, has always been there. And I think what people just need to be aware of is that might get a firm's name out there, but you still need to do your research. You shouldn't hire a firm based solely on having seen them on late night TV sometimes, certainly.
Okay, so let's pursue that now that the door has been kicked wide open, and we're now starting to see competing commercials for various firms around Vancouver, around British Columbia. And you're suggesting, Kevin, I think quite rightly, that a snappy ad doesn't necessarily take care of biz. You still need to do homework. And Scott, and you've said this on this program in the past, sometimes when people call you up at Murphy Battista for legal advice, one of the things you tell them is, you really don't need a lawyer here. Thanks for calling. You need to know where you stand legally, but you can pretty much carry this one off by yourself.
Yeah, I would say probably 30 to 40 times a year I have that exact conversation with clients or potential clients. And the reason I do is they have injuries that are resolved or are resolving. ICBC's indicated they want to settle with them. And, ICBC is fairly decent to deal with. They're not this sinister beast that everybody makes them out to be. And especially on small claims where your injuries are resolved, there's not a lot of wage loss, there's no real contest about who's going to be at fault. They're going to pay you something.
Right.
And what we do is we say, look, this is what the case is worth. This is what ICBC should pay you. Tell them you've talked to us, and they'll probably put as much money on the table as they can to prevent you from coming back to us. And that's usually enough for most people. We don't take cases like that because what we find is we can pretty much always get people more money, but usually it's just enough to justify the fees they pay us.
Right. So you're not really enhancing their wealth.
No.
You're maybe getting a few extra dollars, but it's not taking on. It's not a case that would be meaningful in a Murphy Battista context.
Well, we're not going to take any cases unless it adds value to the client.
Right.
Full stop. We do not want to have clients that are anything less than fully satisfied. And if they're, if you're just basically tithing their file, that's just not reasonable.
Okay. So then, Kevin, when people call up Murphy Battista and seek you out online, they want that initial phone call that Scott just described, and maybe they need some legal advice, or maybe they can do it by themselves, or maybe they actually do really need a good lawyer. How does the firm determine which of those cases you're going to accept and which you aren't worthy of your time? Sure. But you know what I mean. We're not going to take that one. We will take that one. How do you make those calls?
Well, we'll spend some time with the individual, either over the phone or in person, and go through the facts, go through their injuries, go through the resolution, hopefully, of those injuries. And then we'll give them our advice about what we think their best next step is. If it's going to be a complicated issue where they need counsel, then we'll make that recommendation. If, as Scott said, it's something where they might be best off trying to resolve it directly, then we'll tell them that as well. So I think what they want to do is get some initial advice, and we're happy to do that. If it doesn't mean that we end up taking on the file, so be it. We're still happy to give that initial advice.
And those calls are free, are they not, Scott?
Yep.
When you I mean, it happens. You get into a car accident on the way home, and, some guy's really mad at you, and you exchange information on the roadside, and he's mad enough to say, I'm coming after you, you jerk, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you're home. You're scared now because you've been in an accident. You were partly at fault, or maybe not. Who cares? But you're scared. And somebody's angry at you, and they threaten the law at you. So you make that phone call. You're not going to charge somebody who's scared out of their wits just looking for a legal leg to stand on, or not, are you?
No, we just want to, firstly, we want to make sure that the file is not going to get away on them.
Right.
And, there's people that we've had phone calls right from the hospital.
Oh, really?
And I don't encourage that. But what we want to do is when we talk to people on the phone initially, we want to determine whether or not this is the type of case where they need a lawyer or where they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And the types of cases where they would need a lawyer potentially would be where the injuries are obviously quite serious.
Right.
Where there is a dispute about whether or not ICBC is going to pay, whether there's a dispute about liability or some other legal issue, and whether or not there's going to be a potential for a lot of work time to be lost. And if those factors are present, then we're going to want to meet with these people and talk about whether or not they want to hire us.
Right.
But the vast majority of people don't have those factors, and they can probably deal with ICBCR on their own. They may get to a point where they just want to hire us, and that's fine. But
Right.
we don't want to take people that don't need us.
Right. Well, when we come back, we need to take a quick break here. But when we come back, Kevin and Scott both, we're going to talk about, so we're at that point where it's suddenly important to us to have a lawyer. And so then, and all those snappy ads on TV notwithstanding, let's go through the methodology that you would recommend for people to choose a lawyer that's going to be on their side and maybe help them out. And I also want to ask you fellows both about this recent appeals court decision here in BC regarding roadside suspensions. It's just a week or so old, and it's not without its full share of controversy. This is The Law Show. Our guests are Scott Stanley and Kevin Gorley from Murphy Battista, LLP, here in Vancouver, and we'll be back with lots more right after this.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is AM 650's The Law Show.